Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm here today to start my February reading wrap-up. Please excuse the kind of eerie atmosphere here. I've just moved and I'm trying to figure out the best places to film. This is my dark green bedroom, so maybe not the most light-filled space, but anyway, it kind of suits the book that I'm going to talk about today, which is The Heretic's Daughter by Kathleen Kent. This was on my January TBR, but I didn't get to it in January until I think maybe January 30th I started reading it. But today is February 3rd, so I read this very quickly for me. This book had been on my library TBR for a very, very long time. I couldn't even remember who had recommended it, where I'd heard about it. I did see that my friend Tanya had read it a long time ago, so I'm not sure if I heard her talk about it or who, but I'm really, really glad that I ended up reading this book. I thought that this debut novel was so compelling. I read it so quickly because I just really wanted to know what happened. I was very drawn into the Carrier family. So Martha Carrier is one of the women who was killed during the Salem witch trials in the 1600s. And Kathleen Kent is a descendant of Martha Carrier. And so she wrote this book about her ancestor. And she did, I think, really good, extensive research, and she brought to life this time in Massachusetts in a way that I found to be very readable, and the characters were so layered, and I cared so much about them, and I didn't want them to suffer the fates that they suffered. The frenzy of the witch trials is really well explained in this book. And I think the fact that Martha Carrier lived in a neighboring village to Salem was very helpful to kind of remove you from Salem itself as being this really specific character in the story. And rather, you're kind of seeing Salem from far away. They're hearing, the fact that these women and men and children are being taken and jailed and tortured and questioned in front of these tribunals. And so you see it from a bit of a removed place. And Sarah is our main character. Sarah is Martha's daughter, her only daughter. And Sarah is telling the story to her descendant, in kind of a letter format, but a very, very long letter. And I was just really wrapped up in it. I cared about every single member of this family. I wanted them all to be happy. There is an interesting subplot story about the father, Thomas, and his life before that you don't really get a full picture of. But I did find out that there is a prequel to this book called The Wolves of Andover. And that is Martha and Thomas's love story of how they fell in love, and also more clarity around Thomas's backstory. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. I thought it was like heart-wrenching at times. It was absolutely horrendous the way that these women, children, and men were treated. The frenzy of the young women who were accusing, perfect strangers of witchcraft and horrible acts, the kind of craze of it, the frenzy of it, and then how it kind of died down and became not trendy anymore, and then it was over. So this very, and 19 people were killed because of it. So it's a very heart-wrenching in so many ways, but it's also about family, it's about loyalty, it's about rising to expectations, it's about staying true to who you are, being true to your authentic self, standing up to bullies, standing up to what you believe isn't right. So there's a lot of wonderful themes in here, and I definitely will read in the future The Wolves of Andover. And yeah, I would highly recommend this. I think it was a really wonderful historical fiction. It gives you a great overview of the Salem witch trials in a way that gets inside the kind of day-to-day machinations of 1600s life, which I really enjoyed as well. Understanding that kind of settler mentality. Obviously, there is. I don't think that the Indigenous First Nations representation was necessarily perfect, but I think that it was in a lot of ways probably quite realistic to the way that a lot of these colonial settlers were feeling towards Indigenous people. So while it feels uncomfortable to hear Indigenous people referred to in the ways that they were referred to here, I think it probably is accurate to the way they were being treated at the time. So that is my review of The Heretic's Daughter by Kathleen Kent, and I will check in again with you when I have finished another book this month. Hi everyone, good morning. Okay, so I finished 2 books in the last 2 days, and I'm gonna just tell you all about them. So I finished Woolgathering by Patti Smith. This is a slim little volume of meandering collection of thoughts and observations, and I love that about Patti Smith. She just has this way of sharing that is beautifully, evocative of imagery and very calm and kind of observant of what's going on around her. And so it was lovely, a little volume, and I'm glad to own it because I think it's just such a lovely little object in and of itself, the book. So that's Woolgathering by Patti Smith. Okay, so everybody, I may have just read my top book of 2025, which is a lot to say because it's only the 3rd book I finished in 2025. But this book, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, is a masterpiece. I don't usually fall for hype or find hype to be always worthy of the books, but this, in my opinion, is worthy of all the hype. It is absolutely incredible. This won the Women's Prize in 2021. Women's Prize for Fiction, obviously. This is fiction. This is my 3rd read of Maggie O'Farrell. I feel like compared to the novel The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox, which I read, which is an earlier novel of hers, this is absolutely perfectly rendered. There's nothing in here that is in a wrong place. It is masterfully put together. This book could not be more of a me book. I don't know how it could be more of a me book. It is perfectly executed. It is heartfelt. It made me cry. It made me become totally absorbed in this world. I will think about this book for a very, very long time. The characters are so richly rendered. I cared so much about Ines and Bartholomew and Hamnet and the father, and I like all of them. So if you're not aware, I don't know why you wouldn't be aware. I mean, this book was all over BookTube for a very long time, but if you're not aware of what this book is about, it is an author's exploration of the possible source for Hamlet, the play Hamlet that Shakespeare wrote. It evokes the 1500s. It evokes Shakespeare's time. Shakespeare's never named in here, but we know that's who he is. His character was so interesting. I thought her interpretation of who Shakespeare may have been to be just wonderful. Spelled Agnes, but pronounced Ines, I think. Or an Inez, maybe with more of a Z sound, is Hamnet's wife. And her character was just, I loved her. There was a little bit of an element of the supernatural in here, but I wouldn't call it magical realism in any way. Just this idea that there's something beyond the concrete. There is the beautiful relationships built between Ines and her husband, between Hamnet and his twin Judith, between Susanna, who is the third sibling, the oldest sibling in the Shakespeare family. There is this tension between the class system, between, the early part of this book where it's described that Shakespeare's father was violent is just done so well. It's like the feeling of what it must be like, because I myself have never experienced this, to live with a violent person, to live with someone who could potentially hurt you, and the way that you act in reaction to that person, the way that you're cautious, the way that you're reserved, the way that you're always on alert for the potential of that person to become violent, was, I think, depicted brilliantly in this story. The nature that is evoked, the atmosphere of Stratford in the 1500s, the atmosphere of London is a little bit less described, but it still is very vividly described. The life of the playwright, who is actually also an actor, which I never really thought about before. I never thought about what Shakespeare's actual life was like when he was writing these plays, and what he was pursuing and how it worked. All those things. This isn't even very long. This is like just over 300 pages, and it's chock-a-block with amazingness. Like I was pulled into this almost instantly. After every chapter, I was like, this is such an amazing book. This is just an exceptional book. It is obviously, if you know, there is a theory that Shakespeare's son did die at 11 years old. The records do not say what he died of. So O'Farrell here is speculating that he died of the Black Plague, the Black Death. She describes the way the disease got to the family, and it is this incredibly beautifully structured chapter where you follow the journey of one flea from Egypt all the way to Stratford. Again, just perfectly executed, in my opinion. I can't say anything bad about this. The only way that I think you wouldn't like this book is if this style is not one that you like. So you're not as into character. But even if you like plot, there's a lot of plot in here too. It's just a more subtle plot. It's a family. It's about a family. It's about the inner workings of a family. And it's about grief. And the grief that is described in here, again, the love and devotion tempered with the grief, just brilliantly rendered. I cannot say enough about this. This is so good. I'm amazed at this piece of writing. I think it deserves all the hype it got. I think it deserves all the awards it got. It's a pleasure to be able to read something that is just like, I think this book has entered into my top 10 novels of all time. Let's put it that way. I actually contemplated, could this take the place of my top novel of all time? And the answer to that is no. It can't. But it's very close. It's very close. Like, this is top 2, top 3, top 5 for sure. It is excellent. This is the type of book that I just totally resonate with. It's historical, but it's also universal, because there's a universality to being a human, right? There's a universality to it. Whether you're living in the 1500s or the 2000s, there is a level of humanity, of existing, of loving, of losing, of trying to find who you are and be true to who you are and be authentic to who you are, while also honoring the people that you love and that love you. All of those things are universal themes. So all of those things are in here, and so if you haven't read this, read it. I can't even say who should not read this. I mean, again, if there are people that don't like it, for whatever reason, they just don't resonate with the characters. I resonated instantly. I loved the voice, the way the story is told. It has a feeling of oldness, like a kind of a fairy tale-esque to it, but very minimally, just enough to make it feel like you're in a different time period. Anyway, I could just blah, blah, blah on about this. I'm not going to do a full review. I mean, this book, I think, probably has tons of reviews. It was super popular when it came out. I feel like this book has taught me that if I think I'm going to resonate with something, which I did think I would like it, I didn't think I'd love it, then maybe I should try to read them a bit sooner, just so that I don't have to miss out on something that is so exceptional. So, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, my second 5-star read of February. I feel like I could be on a roll here. I just want to call this 5-star February and just keep reading 5-star books. So, yay. Okay, I'll be back again soon when I'm finished another book. Hey, everybody. Okay, so I have 2 books to wrap up for you. And the first one that I finished earlier this week was Orwell's Roses by Rebecca Solnit. I listened to this one on audio, and Rebecca Solnit narrates it. So this was a really great nonfiction. I really enjoy Rebecca Solnit's writing. She weaves fact and personal story together in just a way that I find really brilliant. So this book is in a lot of ways a pseudo-biography of George Orwell, weaved together with rose history. So like facts about roses being used in political movements, the rose industry, people planting roses in their gardens, rose lore, things like that. So she weaves that all in there. She also weaves in other facts about gardens and socialism history, communist history. There's a lot about Stalin in here, because all these things in different ways relate to George Orwell and his kind of view of the world. The other thing that I would say this book does is analyze 1984, George Orwell's arguably most famous novel, his last novel, I believe. And so if you haven't read 1984, I think that maybe you should. Either you could read it in tandem with reading this book, or you could read it before. I don't really recommend 1984 as a reading experience, because I didn't enjoy my reading experience of 1984. It was interesting to listen to Rebecca Solnit's interpretation of the text, because she saw beauty in things that I definitely did not see beauty in. I found it a very difficult book to read. I found it very harrowing. I didn't find any hope in it or any beauty, but she seemed to find those things. So it was interesting to listen to her interpretation of it, and I would definitely say that it elevated the book slightly to hear the context behind Orwell's way of looking at the world and what he was trying to say with the book, according to her. I didn't necessarily agree that the book was successful, and certainly Solnit herself, said that, Orwell was better at his nonfiction writing than his fiction. Like, he wasn't an amazing novelist. I would agree with that. But I went into it not knowing really much at all about George Orwell, and came out of it knowing a lot and having an appreciation for his role, the way he looked at the world, and definitely seeing him as a flawed individual. She was not making him out to be somehow, an amazing person with no flaws. She was honoring his work, and I thought that that was really valid. And so I really enjoyed it. It was, it taught me a lot, and it's actually, I think, a really good book to read right now, as we are all kind of dealing with the aftermath of, or the current administration of the United States and what they are trying to do, what they are trying to implement. And I think you can see a lot of parallels between that and what happened in the USSR with Stalin. And so it's a really good thing to read and to understand in context of like history repeating and the things that can happen, the things that Orwell was against, very much so. So definitely recommend Orwell's Roses by Rebecca Solnit. She narrates it herself, and she has a kind of breathy and soft voice. And so I could see that that would bother some people, but I really enjoy hearing her narrate her books because I feel like it just brings me closer to the intention of the text when she was writing it. So just maybe listen to a sample before you download the audiobook if you have a certain type of voice that you don't enjoy listening to. So just a warning there. And then the other book that I finished, a novel, is What Storm, What Thunder by Myriam J.A. Chancy. This is Myriam J.A. Chancy is a Haitian Caribbean writer, also grew up partially in Canada as well. This is a novel told through multiple narratives of the aftermath and the occurrence of the huge earthquake that happened in Haiti in 2010. This was brilliantly executed. I think that Myriam J. Chancy is a fantastic writer. This is exactly what a multiple narrative novel should be. It is long enough in each character that you get a good sense of who they are. You get a good sense of a characterization for them, and then you move on to another character, and then each character is woven throughout the stories of the other characters as well. So it is one of those things that for the first few characters, you're hearing these names and you don't really have a context for who those people are. And then later on, you will read the context of that person and you can relate it back to the previous sections. So I think for some people that might be a bit off-putting, but I really like that style, and I think Chancy does it really well in here. This story is harrowing. It is super compelling. There are so many amazing characters. There's a lot of beautiful spiritual undertones and thoughts about grief, thoughts about you really learn a lot about Haiti, Haitian culture, Caribbean culture. You learn a lot about rescue missions and these organizations that come in after disasters to try to help, and the things that actually happen to the people when they're being helped. So I think that's a really important thing to learn, because it's not as straightforward as a disaster happening and then you feeling bad, so you give some money and then feel like you've contributed, because I think, where this money goes, how it's distributed, if the people actually get help, and what actually happens for them after these things is super important thing to understand. And I think it's really explained beautifully in this novel. I will definitely be reading more of Chancy's work. I think I just loved her style. I loved the way she depicted life. There was every character felt different. There were some characters that felt like they could have a whole novel about them alone, but I didn't feel like I was missing out ultimately on anything, because I think the story does a good job of focusing on the earthquake and the aftermath of the earthquake in these people's lives, because that's what it's about, Yeah, it's very good. I'm really glad I read it. And funny thing, 2 days ago, we actually had an earthquake, which was hilarious. I was like, oh my gosh, is that an earthquake? So we had we felt two kind of vibrations. We were not the epicenter. The epicenter was further up, about an hour, 2 hours away from here. So we just felt some tremors, but it was interesting to be reading a book about a big earthquake and then feel an earthquake at the same time. So that is What Storm, What Thunder by Myriam J.A. Chancy. And we're getting very close to the end of February. It is possible that I may finish. Is it possible? I'm not sure if I'm going to finish another book before the end of the month, but if I do, you will see that next. And if I don't, I will see you in the next one. And thank you so much for watching.